I had an affair with my sister's hot fiancé. This is so wrong. That's what I was thinking the whole time that I was kissing Harold. He was my sister's fiancé. Surely this could not be right. But I've been fighting these feelings for a while, and although the circumstances were certainly against my favor, I could not fight the feeling blooming inside me. It all started one rainy night when the rest of my family was still out at work. A particularly bad storm hit, and my dad, mom, and sister, Alison, were stranded at their respective workplaces. Alison and I worked at the same book publishing company. She worked as the head of the marketing department while I managed the company's bookshop. However, it was my day off and Alison was still at work. Not long after the rain started, I was pacing back and forth in the living room. Storms always made me anxious. In particular, thunder made me jump. My sister's fiancé, Harold, must have noticed my uneasiness and made a cup of tea to ease my anxiety. "Thanks, Harold," I said as I took the teacup from his hand. Our hands brushed in the process and I could not help but stare at his gorgeous blue eyes. I felt butterflies in my stomach once again. Since Harold moved in over a month ago, I had been fighting feelings that I definitely should not have for my sister's fiancé. The worst part was that every time I tried to distance myself from him, he seemed to be the one making all the moves. This was wrong, but I could not help it. I tried as I did to fight my feelings, but eventually succumbed to them when Harold offered to give me a hug to lessen my worries. I was on the sofa when he came over. I was shivering at this point, terrified by the raging storm. "What can I do to help?" asked Harold. I was hesitant to answer, especially knowing that only cuddling has really worked for me in the past. "It's embarrassing," I admitted. "Come on, Nate. We've been closer than ever since I moved in. Tell me," he insisted. "Cuddling," I said, blushing. Without hesitation, he then extended me a hug, engulfing me in his strong arms. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to hide the fact that I had been thinking of this very moment for weeks. "Hugging you, and if you would allow, cuddle you," he said nonchalantly. I wish I was as relaxed as him. It was a stark juxtaposition to me who was blushing and had butterflies in their stomach, as I always have whenever I was around. I eventually relented and then he assured me a cozy position. I had never felt that secure with someone. His strong arms around me were enough to calm my breathing and cease my uneasiness about the weather. "You good?" he asked. We stayed like that for a while to further distract me whenever a thunderous sound reverberated around the house. We discussed everything about me, from my job at the bookstore to my aspirations, and even my romantic interests. "What? You mean you've never kissed someone?" Harold asked, aghast. "Yeah, I suppose I'm just not worth a true love's kiss," I said sarcastically. But there was a hint of self-pity in there that Harold must have detected. "You want to have your first kiss?" he questioned. "What? I'm definitely curious, sure," I said. But I must admit, I'd been feeling left out. For God's sake, my best friend is engaged. Meanwhile, I've not even been kissed. "Let me," he whispered, and my heart thumped wildly in my chest. What was happening? Was this a figment of my imagination? Surely, in my dreams, I had been dreaming of the day I would finally be kissed, and ideally it would have been Harold, since my feelings for him were harbored. But it was not right. He was with Alison. He was engaged. "I cannot possibly," I replied. "You're with my sister." "It's just a kiss, no feelings involved," he assured, as he directed his gaze towards my lips. When he looked back up, my brown eyes met his beautiful blue orbs, and our lips gravitated toward one another. I had always wondered if I would be a bad kisser, especially since I'm considered a late bloomer. I missed out on years of experience at this point, but when Harold started moving his lips expertly, it fit exactly with mine, and our lips danced so gracefully. I was under the impression in the romance novels I adored reading, the descriptions of the first kiss were likely exaggerated, but it was not for me. With Harold, everything felt unreal, and I was genuinely floored by the fact that it was possible to experience such a spark. "Stop, this is wrong," I said as we broke apart. "Why does it feel so right then?" he retorted, just staring at me. He made a point, so this time around I initiated the kiss. We stayed that way for a while until we heard a loud gasp. It was Alison. We were caught red-handed. "Allie," I started, "it's not what it looks like." Alison looked enraged as she put her bag down. She had returned from work already without us noticing, and we definitely got too careless. Harold was too floored to speak, and he put his head between his hands in disbelief that Alison caught us. "You," Alison shouted. "How dare you kiss my fiancé? Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" "No, Allie, please." Harold was going to attempt to defend me, but I stopped him from taking the fall for me. "It was all me," I confessed. "I did seduce Harold. It was against his will." Harold attempted to speak again, likely to protect me, but Ellie attacked me, trying to slap me and even kicking my shin. You slut. Not only have you been a complete embarrassment to the family by being gay, but now you're not content and want to steal my fiancé? Screamed Alison. Harold attempted to calm her down and offered to bring her to the next room. However, at that very moment, Mom and Dad also walked in and were appalled by the scene of Alison attacking me. Alison was quick to fill them in about what had happened, and of course, she had to constantly emphasize that I was at fault. Nathan, how could you do this to your sister? Asked my mom, evidently despondent by the scene of her two children fighting. This is unacceptable, said my dad. We accepted you for your sexuality, but really, making moves on your sister's fiancé. I'm sure you have plenty of apologies to give both your sister and Harold. I glanced at Harold immediately, warning him with my eyes. I was already ruined in the eyes of my family, and I could not let him take the fall for me. Thankfully, he did not come to my defense anymore. Not enough! What will I do with your apology, slut? I want him out, screamed Alison. Mom and Dad looked at each other, obviously uncomfortable with the discussion. This should be non-debatable. How do I sleep peacefully knowing my slut of a gay brother wants my fiancé, who lives under the same roof? Alison asked. Your sister is right. You've crossed the line this time, Nathan. You're out, said my dad, plainly. He had always been the level-headed and fair one in the family, so I was not surprised that he was siding with Alison on this. Harold then butted in. Don't you think that's a little extreme? Come on, it's storming out, he reasoned. Are you defending him? Asked Alison, which then silenced Harold. You heard what Dad said. Get out. That's how I was kicked out of my family's home for kissing my sister's fiancé. Over the course of the next few days, I settled into my new apartment. Harold texted me the night that I was kicked out, and I had been in touch with him since then. In fact, he had been helping me with moving and spent a considerable amount of time in my place. It was comforting having someone familiar around, especially since the manner in which I had to leave home was so shocking and painful. Harold was most apologetic about the situation, and even offered to confess to my parents and Alison what had really happened, so I could be clear to the accusation. He asserted that he did not regret what he did, though. I've not felt that alive in a long time, he confessed to me, as we were making dinner at my apartment. I wanted to say I had never felt that alive until he kissed me, but I knew that I would be pushing it. Harold and I found comfort in each other's presence, and admittedly our kiss was electrifying, but that still did not mean anything. It did not mean that he reciprocated my feelings. Nate, I'm having trouble with Allie again, Harold stated as we sat side by side about to devour the food we had just made. What is it? I asked, concerned about Harold. Alison has always had the upper hand on him, and this was not the first time that he came to me for advice. She's not herself lately. She's been getting home late, and I also caught her lying the other day. The other day was our anniversary, and she had forgotten. I told her I made reservations at her favorite restaurants since we are, after all, rebuilding a relationship. After all the drama that happened, he explained, and she couldn't make it because of an important business meeting. I raised my eyebrow. That's not very like Alison. So what did you discover? I questioned. She went to his apartment complex. Definitely not work, he expounded. I think she's cheating on me. I gasped. Oh, Harold, I said as I snooped in closer and gave him a bear hug. At the back of my head, I was thinking if this was our karmic residue for what had happened. But no, it could not be. After all, Harold did it with no ill intention. He still did not deserve this, especially since he was regretful of what happened between us. For a while, I just became the friend he needed. I held his hand while he rested his head against my shoulder. If I could not be with him as a lover, I would be there as a friend. I do not know what came to me, but something in my gut told me to follow Alison to work that day. I did so with the intention of protecting Harold, should Alison really be as unfaithful. Part of me was also hoping that if Harold sees concrete proof of Alison's infidelity, maybe there was a chance for us to pursue something more than a friendship. Discreetly, I followed Alison's car as it left our parents' driveway. This was usually the time when she would head to work, but I tailed her car until it made an unfamiliar right turn. She was heading west of our workplace and towards the unfamiliar and remote place described by Harold. When Alison alighted from her car, so did I, and thankfully she did not notice me behind the pillars as she walked towards one of the apartments in the complex. Alison made 3 firm knocks and called out to someone inside the unit. It's A, she announced. A hefty tattooed guy opened the door and Alison walked right in. My heart dropped. Perhaps Harold was right. Maybe Alison was indeed cheating on him. Taking a risk and wanting to record their conversation, I listened in at the door. However, instead of the sounds of kissing and making love that I was expecting, I instead heard an even worse interaction. 300 for another bag, a deep voice boomed. Heavy on these drugs, eh? You've been here every day for the past few weeks. None of your business, Alison retorted. I've been going through a tough time, okay? Drugs keep me going. My eyes widened at the conversation I heard, and wanting some sort of confirmation, I peeped through the small gap in the window. I witnessed Alison being handed a small bag of white powder. Not wanting to leave without evidence, I whipped up my phone and snapped a photo of Alison as she tried the substance. I could not believe my eyes. Is my seemingly perfect sister doing drugs? Somehow this was worse than finding out she was having an affair. I spent the whole afternoon pondering over what I had seen, but I knew that the right thing to do was to tell my parents and inform Harold too. Thankfully, I did not bump into Alison that morning, so I did not have to face her. However, when I pulled up to my parents' driveway later that day, Alison emerged from her car. I cursed and was annoyed by the terrible timing. Although I was planning to tell our parents about her illegal activities, I still had her best interest in mind. I wanted him to get her to seek help, but I was scared of how she was going to react, especially when it was coming from me. What the hell are you doing here? She asked, blocking the door. I'm going to talk to Mom and Dad, I said as I tried to avoid her gaze. About? She questioned. Tell me or I'm not letting you through. I sighed. There was no use arguing with Alison. What she wanted, she usually got, so I decided to reply to her honestly. I saw you this morning, Allie, I confessed. I know what you've been up to. I know you've been addicted to drugs. A flicker of recognition flashed through her face, and I knew at once that I was right. What? I don't know what the hell you're talking about, she stuttered. That was a telltale sign of a lie, because one thing about Alison was that she never lost confidence, except in times when she knew she was really in trouble. I saw you. I have proof, I responded as I held my phone up. No, this can't be. You're already ruining my relationship with Harold. I won't let you ruin my relationship with my parents, Nathan. Enough. She slammed as she successfully managed to take my phone and immediately slammed it on the ground. She then stomped on it. I attempted to salvage it, but to no avail. I won't let you ruin my image, Nathan. If you're happy being known as the gay homewrecker of the family, I won't let you inflict the same damage on me. I was in disbelief. She had gone too far this time around. I'm still telling Mom, Dad, and Harold, in fact. I could bring them to your dealer, I shouted. Alison's eyes widened, and then she looked around, scanning the streets for any signs of the neighbor. Of course, she was conscious about being discovered and having a bad reputation in the eyes of the public. Shut up, she whispered, threateningly. I'm pregnant, and you're causing so much distress. She then started patting her stomach. Get away from me before I call the cops, she shouted. Help, neighbors, help. Miss Trudeau, the woman living next door, immediately came to her aid. What's wrong, dear? She asked Alison. Get this man away from me. Not only is he gay and an utter disgrace to my family, but now he's accusing me of things I never did. Get him away, Alison screamed. Not before long, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered around us, and Alison just kept hurling slurs after slurs at me. You disgust me. I can't believe Mom and Dad paid for your education, only for you to turn out this way. You disgusting gay slut. How are you not embarrassed by your actions? Alison boomed. I even heard some people in the crowd agreeing. Worrying, isn't it? This is against Christ's teachings, said an elderly neighbor. How embarrassing for Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, who raised him as a Christian. The saddest part about all this was when I realized that my parents were inside the house, peeking at all the commotion, but not even bothering to come to my aid. Defeated, I headed toward my car and headed home. For the entirety of the next day, I was fast asleep, avoiding all my family troubles and not to mention my broken heart, because deep down I knew that Harold would never like me the way I liked him. However, I was awoken by a loud knock. Nate, open up, called a familiar voice. I opened up to the sight of Harold, who only took one glance at me before he placed my face in between his big hands. Nate, I'm so sorry, he said as he placed a kiss on my forehead. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for letting you take the blame when Alison first saw us. I'm sorry for not owning up to it. I'm sorry for not defending you in front of your folks and in front of those nasty neighbors. I was perplexed, but of course I appreciated his apology. And the fact that he personally visited me to say those words. What's going on, Harold? I questioned. I found out about the confrontation yesterday. It was too much, he admitted. I told your folks about Alison's illegal dealings. You did? Did you show him the pictures? I asked. Unbeknownst to Alison, I had already sent Harold the images of her and her dealer at the apartment complex before I even went to my parents' house yesterday. Even though she ended up breaking my phone, in the end, Harold already had copies of the picture. I did, indeed. And I also told him where the pictures came from, he confirmed. They want to see you. They want to have you back. Come home, Nate. He grabbed my hand and kissed it sincerely. Come home, Nathan, he repeated. with much more conviction. I broke it off with Alison yesterday after I found out that she had shamed you in public. Come home, and this time you'll come to me, Nate. I ran my hand through his soft hair and then placed my hand on the side of his face. Nate, I've wanted you for the longest time already, but we can't possibly do this. He sighed but held my hand firmly. No, listen. It was my mistake for not fighting for you the first time around. Let me make things right. Let me fight for you now. With that, I leaned in for a kiss, and just as our first kiss it was everything I ever thought I needed and more. Come home, Nate. Your parents owe you an apology, and I owe them an explanation, because they plan to do this for a lifetime more, he said as he leaned in for another kiss. Harold and I came back to my parents' house, and we stood there for a minute or two, just holding hands. I was hesitant and still nervous. Surely my parents believed the drug addict claims against Alison because there was concrete proof, but what makes me think that they would accept my relationship with Harold? With the door first bolted open, my dad's gaze immediately went towards mine and Harold's intertwined hands. Sir, I can explain, said Harold. You better, my dad replied before he hugged me. Welcome home, son. As I expected, my parents apologized profusely for kicking me out, and not for standing up against me when Alison was verbally harassing me in front of the neighborhood. I tried to understand where they were coming from, seeing as they have always valued the respect and perception of the public, but I would still need time to forgive them. After all, they stood on the sidelines when I got humiliated and torn by my sister, who ended up being the villain after all. When I told my folks that I would try to heal from this and that eventually I would forgive them again, they understood. Now what is going on here? Mom asked me once we were through with the whole apology bit. Ma'am, allow me to explain, started Harold. Alison and I have been in a toxic relationship for a while. We thought that getting engaged and me moving into your home would fix our problems, but it worsened them. But I met Nate and suddenly things took a turn for the better. I found myself enjoying his company more than his sister's. I was in denial for a while, especially since I've always thought I was straight. But now I know better, and had the epiphany that maybe things never worked out with whom I thought I was my dream, because I was never meant to be with a girl. You mean you've liked each other all along? Dad queried. I nodded. I've had feelings for him for a while, but I kept them at bay out of respect for Alison, I confirmed. And you've tried to uphold my relationship, sir, believe me. But when Alison was coming at me 24/7 and had nothing to point out but my flaws and wrongdoings, it was hard to stay in love. Eventually, I fell out of love with her, and as you may expect, I fell for Nate. Mom then sat beside me and clasped my hand in hers. I've made the wrong choices before by not supporting you or standing up for you, but I also know better now. I'll let you be and let you find the happiness that you deserve, wherever it may be or with whomever it may be. Dad nodded in agreement. I smiled sincerely at Mom and cherished the rare hug that I received from my dad. For the first time in a while, I felt accepted by my family. With Harold by my side, I knew I could conquer whatever may come. The next day, I'd come from work early to a meeting and set my bag in the meeting room, immediately before heading to the pantry to make some coffee. There I saw Alison, evidently looking rough. She was without her usual glam and even her outfit was looking lackluster. Happy now? She asked. Mom and Dad know that Harold broke up with me. You must be beaming with joy. I shook my head. Honestly, no. Alison, believe it or not everyone is vengeful like you, I explained. Then why the hell did you expose me? She questioned sternly. You need help. And as your brother, you stopped being my brother the moment you kissed my fiancé, she boomed. I'm not done with you, Nathan. She then walked away, and I shifted my attention back to my coffee. After a few minutes, I headed to the meeting room where Alison alongside some other staff was already seated. I set up my laptop and opened my presentation, nervous about the upcoming proposal that I was pitching, especially since a lot of those in attendance were higher-ups who could make or break our careers. Just before I was about to start, Alison headed out, and when she re-entered, she was with Mrs. Jensen, the owner of the book publishing company where we worked at. Behind them were two buff men whom I recognized as Mrs. Jensen's bodyguards. I told you I'm not done with you, whispered Alison in my ear as she brushed past me. Search his bag, ordered Mrs. Jensen, and the two men proceeded to go through my work bag and my laptop bag. With all due respect, what on earth is happening? I asked, perplexed. I got a tip by Mrs. Alison that one of our employees tried to sell her some illegal drugs. Imagine my horror when I found out that it was none other than her very own brother. You, Mrs. Jensen, cleared up. I shook my head profusely. No, ma'am, this is a mistake, I reasoned. At the same time, one of the men took out a small bag of white substance that was unmistakably the very drugs that we're searching for. I told you, bragged Alison to Mrs. Jensen. Unbelievable from you, Nathan, scolded Mrs. Jensen. You're dismissed, effective immediately. Proposal be damned. I don't care if we skip your proposal because I certainly don't tolerate this nonsense in my company. Out! I glanced at Alison, who had a victorious look plastered onto her face. She was not kidding when she said she would get revenge on me. Tried as I may beg for my job, Mrs. Jensen was relentless and ordered the bodyguards to escort me out of the meeting room. Be thankful I'm just firing you and not calling the police, snarked Miss Jensen. Overpowered, I had no choice but to retreat to my desk and pack my stuff. I could not believe my own sister framed me for her actions that she was guilty of. It was unbelievable. Soon after, I was heading down the stairs with a known voice to interrupt my descent. Nathan, wait up, shouted Alison. What now, Allie? Are you happy now? Have you gotten even, huh? I challenged. Not quite, she said. I'm just starting. My drugs that I snuck into your bag were worth every penny. I may not have my dose for today, but at least I'll get to witness you being fired. And somehow that's much better than my daily dose of substance, don't you think? I'll just order some more tomorrow, and I'll get high while still keeping my job. Meanwhile, you'll be jobless. Alison, butted in another familiar voice. It was Mrs. Jensen, and just like me, she looked taken back by Alison's confession. How dare you? Miss Jensen, I'm so sorry. I was joking. It was not me. It was Nathan. You saw it. In his bag, Alison begged. You just confessed, you idiot. You thought everyone else was still in the meeting room, didn't you? That's why you're so confident, rubbing it all over Nathan's face, right? You thought no one could hear, Miss Jensen responded. Ma'am, please no. I'm pregnant. Don't do this, Alison pleaded. Her pleas fell on Mrs. Jensen's deaf ears. Being ever so ruthless, Miss Jensen also fired her and said that I could get my job back, as I was wrongfully accused. As usual, this enraged Alison, who tried to grab my hand and push me down the stairs. Let go of me, I said as I yanked my arm off. Unfortunately, Alison's grip on my hand was so tight that when I finally yanked it off, the sheer force caused her to tumble one step and eventually down a short flight of stairs. Since she was pregnant, I immediately came to her aid and called an ambulance. I also called our family while we were on the way to the emergency room. When we got there, Alison was unconscious, but thankfully the results showed that she was alright. I heaved a sigh of relief as the doctor delivered the news to me and my parents and Harold. And the baby? Asked Mom. Baby? Repeated the doctor. Yes, Alison told us that she was pregnant, that she was carrying my child, explained Harold. I squeezed Harold's hand and he pulled me closer. Having them there for emotional support was all I needed. Sir, I'm sorry to inform you, but I am certain that there is no baby. Alison went through a full-body x-ray and she's most definitely not pregnant, which is why I was confused as to why the first aiders flagged her as a priority. She is certainly not pregnant. Mom and Dad were despondent, with yet another lie of Alison's disappointing them. Meanwhile, Harold heaved a sigh of relief. Although Alison had lied, he was free of any fatherly duties for now. You'd think by now that Alison is done with her lies, but then she keeps surprising us, I pointed out. Harold chuckled and pulled me closer. He then placed a soft kiss at the top of my head. Well, we still gotta thank her and give her some credit, despite her crazy. If you did not kiss your sister's ex-fiancé, we wouldn't be here now, would we? Conclusion. After the stunt that she pulled about her fake pregnancy, Mom and Dad had enough of Alison's antics and decided to send her to rehabilitation. She moved a few states away and is now living in the rehab facilities. Her therapist believed that she may be able to recover fully if she was physically distant enough, to which my parents agreed. Since Alison was fired, Mrs. Jensen needed someone to fill her position, and thankfully, since I was deemed experienced enough with my interactions as the manager of the company's bookshop, I was offered the previous post. Miss Jensen said I was skilled and seasoned enough to take the role, but I knew that part of her also gave it to me as a means of compensation for misjudging me about the substance found in my bag. As for my parents, we have started rebuilding our bond after everything that has happened. Slowly, I learned to forgive them for their shortcomings. In fact, I could see the genuine effort that they were making to make me feel more welcome now. They were standing up to their neighbors who had a tendency to discriminate. They said that they felt that it was right to use their voice, which is something I have taught them. Harold and I are better than ever. Recently, Harold decided to move in with me so we could practice what it would be like when we got married. He still made tea for me, cuddled me whenever there was a thunderstorm, and read my favorite books with me. Despite all the drama, he's still himself, and that was everything I ever wanted. Thankfully, the affair that I had with my sister's ex-fiancé turned out to be the experience I never regretted. The end. Is it acceptable to pursue a relationship with your siblings' exes? Leave a comment and let us know what your thoughts are. Thanks for watching.